The restaurant was buzzing with energy that evening, the kind of place where the lights were warm, the cutlery gleamed, and the tables were filled with people who looked like they belonged to another world of power and wealth. Among them sat one man who drew all the attention without even trying, Mr. Li Zheng, a Chinese billionaire CEO known for his towering success and equally towering pride. He had built empires, commanded boardrooms, and walked into every room expecting respect. But what no one expected was that a single moment in this restaurant would change how everyone saw him, and more importantly, what it revealed about true dignity. At the center of the story was not just the billionaire, but also a young waitress named Maya. She was new at her job, still learning the rhythm of carrying trays and serving tables, but what she lacked in experience, she carried in heart. People often overlooked her presence. She was soft-spoken, humble, and always tried to keep her head down. But fate has a strange way of putting ordinary people into extraordinary situations. That night, Maya would unknowingly find herself at the center of a storm that no one in the restaurant could forget. Mr. Li had a reputation for his temper. Those who worked around him knew he liked things perfect. His wine poured at the right level, his food served at the right temperature, and his presence acknowledged. For him, service wasn't just a job. It was a test of how much people would bend before his authority. Maya, nervous yet determined to do her best, approached his table, unaware that even the smallest slip could spark something bigger than she imagined. The restaurant's soft music and the clinking of glasses almost drowned out the tension that was slowly building at that corner table. Whispers started to move around the room as people noticed the billionaire's sharp tone, the way his eyes narrowed when Maya accidentally placed a dish slightly off-center. To many it seemed trivial, but to him it was an insult to his pride. His voice grew louder and heads began to turn. Some customers exchanged uneasy glances, while others leaned in, curious to see how far this scene would go. Maya stood there, her hands trembling, trying to correct her mistake, when suddenly the billionaire's arrogance reached its peak. What happened next took everyone by surprise. A line had been crossed, and in that single moment, the entire room froze. People gasped, others held their breath, and Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. In the span of a second, the power dynamic shifted in a way no one could have imagined. The billionaire who once commanded attention and fear now found himself facing something completely unexpected. The room fell into silence so heavy that even the music seemed to vanish. All eyes were locked on Mr. Li and Maya, waiting to see what would happen next. And just when it seemed the situation had reached its climax, something shocking occurred that flipped the entire scene upside down. The mighty billionaire, so sure of his dominance, suddenly stumbled into a reality he had never faced before. A second later, he was no longer standing tall but collapsing in a way that left everyone speechless. What caused his sudden downfall? Why did the man who appeared untouchable just moments ago find himself powerless on the ground? And what role would Maya play in the truth that was about to unfold? The answers were still hanging in the air, as the room braced itself for the twist no one saw coming. The sight of the billionaire on the ground sent ripples of shock across the restaurant. For a moment no one moved. Glasses stood untouched, forks hovered midair, and every pair of eyes was fixed on Mr. Li. Just seconds earlier, he had been the loudest presence in the room, commanding attention with his voice and stature. Now, the silence that followed his sudden collapse carried more weight than all his words combined. Maya stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the gasps around her. She had never wanted to be the center of attention, and yet, here she was, with everyone's gaze caught between her trembling hands and the fallen man at her feet. Mr. Li wasn't just any customer. He was known far beyond the walls of this restaurant. Business magazines had written countless stories about his sharp instincts. His rise from a small provincial town in China to becoming a billionaire CEO with international influence. His face had been on covers. His speeches streamed to millions. People spoke of him with a mixture of fear and admiration. To the world he was untouchable. And that's what made this moment even harder to process. How could someone so powerful, so commanding, suddenly lose all control in front of strangers? The waitstaff began to whisper nervously, unsure of what to do. Some feared stepping forward, afraid of the consequences if the billionaire recovered and turned his anger toward them. Others glanced at Maya, expecting her to act, though she was as stunned as everyone else. She replayed the last few moments in her mind. The raised voice, the flash of anger in his eyes, the heat of humiliation burning in her chest, and then the shocking turn when everything flipped in a heartbeat. None of it made sense. The restaurant's manager, a tall man in his 40s with a neatly pressed suit, rushed forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. His face carried the tension of someone caught between duty and fear. He had served wealthy clients before, but never had he seen one collapse so dramatically. He bent down to check on Mr. Lee, but the billionaire's expression was unreadable, a mix of shock, pain, and something else no one could quite understand. It wasn't just his body that seemed shaken, it was his pride, the very foundation of who he believed himself to be. Meanwhile, the diners leaned in, whispering theories. Some thought it was his temper catching up with him, that perhaps the stress of his empire had finally taken its toll. Others speculated about something deeper, something hidden beneath the polished image of a man who appeared to have everything. What they all knew for certain was that they were witnessing a scene that would echo far beyond the walls of this restaurant. Maya's chest tightened as she watched him struggle, not knowing whether to step forward or step back. She wasn't just a waitress in that moment. She was part of a story unfolding in front of the world. Her presence mattered, though she didn't yet understand why. She could feel the weight of unspoken questions pressing in on her. Why had this happened right after their tense exchange? Was it coincidence, or was there something more at play? The seconds stretched on, each one heavy with uncertainty. The restaurant, once alive with laughter and music, now felt like a stage where the outcome of this moment could change lives. And deep inside, Maya sensed that this was only the beginning of something far bigger than an argument over a plate. Something was unraveling, and the truth was still hidden in the silence that followed. The billionaire lay still on the polished floor, his chest rising and falling unevenly, and yet there was something in his expression that unsettled everyone watching. It wasn't just the shock of falling, it was the look of a man who had suddenly realized he wasn't as untouchable as he believed. The manager kept kneeling by his side, whispering words meant to calm him, but his own voice shook. The waitstaff hovered nearby, caught between fear of losing their jobs and the instinct to help. And through it all, Maya stood frozen, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. For Maya, this was more than just an incident with a difficult customer. Life had never been kind to her, and working in this upscale restaurant was supposed to be a new beginning. She had grown up knowing what it felt like to be invisible, to be overlooked by people who thought wealth and status gave them the right to treat others as less. When she took this job, she promised herself she would endure the long hours and the demanding guests, because every paycheck meant supporting her younger brother back home. Yet in one night, one careless encounter, she found herself staring into the center of a storm far greater than anything she had imagined. At the same time, whispers continued among the diners. A businessman at the next table leaned toward his companion and muttered that he had heard rumors of Mr. Lee facing pressure in his company, of hidden rivalries and deals gone wrong. Another guest suggested that perhaps this wasn't just a simple collapse. Maybe stress, betrayal, or even secrets no one could see had finally caught up with him. Every theory only added to the tension, each voice layering new possibilities onto the mystery unfolding before their eyes. In the far corner, a journalist who happened to be dining that evening quietly reached for her phone, her instincts sharper than her appetite. She knew the man on the floor was more than a wealthy customer. He was a story, one that could change headlines by morning. But as she raised her camera, she hesitated. Something about Maya's pale, shaken face told her this wasn't just about a powerful CEO. There was humanity here, a deeper thread that tied them all together. And she couldn't quite decide whether to capture it or wait. The conflict deepened when two security guards from Mr. Lee's entourage rushed in, their presence commanding attention. They spoke quickly in Mandarin, their voices sharp and urgent, as if they were more concerned about protecting his image than his health. Their eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on Maya, who felt her knees weaken under their stare. It was as if they were silently asking, "What part did you play in this?" She lowered her gaze, but the weight of suspicion pressed heavily on her shoulders. The manager tried to maintain order, urging the diners to stay calm, but it was clear that control had slipped away. This was no longer just a restaurant scene. It had become a stage where power, pride, and vulnerability clashed all at once. And in the middle of it all stood Maya, a young woman who had never sought attention but was now tied to a billionaire's unexpected downfall. The air was thick with questions, none with answers. Was Mr. Lee simply overcome by stress, or was there something more hidden beneath his collapse? Were the rumors about his empire true, and did this moment expose cracks in his carefully built image? And what role would Maya, the quiet waitress who happened to stand closest, play in the story that was only beginning to unfold? As the billionaire stirred faintly and the guards whispered hurried instructions, the tension only grew sharper. No one knew what the next moment would bring, but everyone felt it. This night was far from over, and its consequences would reach far beyond these walls. The restaurant felt like it was holding its breath. Mr. Lee had not spoken a word since the fall, and that silence seemed louder than any outburst he could have made. His security guards kept pacing around him, blocking the view of curious diners, but the tension could not be contained. Everyone could still see the billionaire struggling, his once confident posture now reduced to a man fighting to maintain control. The air was heavy, as if the whole room understood that something larger was unraveling right before their eyes. Maya gripped the edge of a nearby chair, trying to steady her trembling hands. She wanted to disappear into the shadows, but no matter how hard she tried, she remained part of the moment. The security guards kept glancing at her, and the way their eyes lingered made her skin prickle with unease. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet their suspicion pressed against her like an invisible weight. A voice inside her whispered that she should leave, that she should slip quietly into the kitchen and pretend none of this had happened. But something stronger rooted her to the spot, the feeling that walking away would only make her look guilty of something she had not done. The journalist in the corner lowered her phone and scribbled notes instead. She knew a photo could capture the fall, but words could reveal the layers beneath. She studied Maya, the nervous waitress who looked both terrified and determined, and wondered why this billionaire's collapse seemed tied to her presence. It wasn't just coincidence. The timing was too sharp, too deliberate. She leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding at the thought that she might be watching the beginning of a story that could shake powerful circles far beyond this restaurant. Meanwhile, the whispers among the diners grew into a low hum. People speculated about Mr. Lee's empire, about the deals he had cut and the rivals he had made. Some wondered if this was a medical issue, others suggested sabotage, and a few claimed to know secrets about his empire that were never meant to reach the public. Every rumor fueled the suspense. Every glance toward Maya tightened the invisible thread connecting her fate to his. Then came a sound that cut through the whispers, a sharp gasp from Mr. Lee himself. His body twitched slightly as if he was trying to rise, but his strength faltered. The guards leaned closer, speaking quickly, but the diners could see enough to sense that something was deeply wrong. The billionaire who once controlled rooms with his presence now looked fragile, almost vulnerable, and that sight created a tension no one could shake off. Maya's breathing grew shallow as the manager stepped toward her. His eyes were firm, almost warning. "Stay here," he whispered under his breath, as if he knew more than he was willing to say aloud. She nodded, but her fear only deepened. Why was she being told to stay put? What was she being pulled into? The suspense grew unbearable when the restaurant doors suddenly opened and two more men entered, figures clearly not part of the staff. Their expressions were sharp, their eyes scanning the room with purpose, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. They moved toward the guards, exchanging words in hushed tones that no one else could hear. But their presence carried weight, the kind of weight that made the diners shrink into their seats. Maya's pulse raced as she realized this was no longer about a single collapse or a heated exchange. This was bigger, much bigger. Something hidden, something dangerous was unfolding in real time, and she was caught in the middle. The billionaire's empire, the whispers of betrayal, the piercing stares of the newcomers. It all pointed to a truth that was about to erupt. The room seemed to tighten, the silence stretching so thin it felt like it might snap. Everyone waited, uncertain of what would happen next. And as Mr. Lee's hand twitched against the floor, his lips parting to speak, the tension reached its peak. The words he was about to say could change everything, but no one in the room knew whether they were ready to hear them. Mr. Lee's lips trembled as if he was about to speak, but instead of words, a sudden cough escaped his throat. The guards bent lower, shielding him from the diner's view, but everyone could feel the ripple of unease. The billionaire's hand clutched at the floor, his fingers curling tightly as though he was reaching for something invisible. Then, in a strained whisper that barely carried across the room, he said a name. No one caught it clearly. Some thought it sounded like Wei. Others swore they heard Maya. The uncertainty only fueled the tension, making every person in the restaurant lean forward as if the truth was within reach. The two mysterious men who had entered moments earlier stiffened at the sound. Their eyes darted toward Maya, quick and sharp, as though the billionaire's broken whisper had singled her out. Maya's knees wobbled, her breath catching in her chest. She shook her head instinctively, silently pleading that she had no part in whatever was unfolding. But deep inside, she knew that being near him at the very moment of his collapse had already tied her fate to his. The journalist in the corner scribbled faster now, sensing the shift. The story was no longer just about a billionaire's public breakdown. It was about a hidden link between two very different lives, a powerful CEO and a young waitress who had never crossed his world until tonight. She knew that if Mr. Lee's words pointed toward Maya, the fallout would be explosive. Then came the second twist, sudden and chilling. One of the mysterious men pulled a small envelope from inside his jacket and slid it quietly into the hands of the head guard. It was done so discreetly most diners didn't notice, but Maya did. She caught the motion in the corner of her eye, and the unease in her stomach grew sharper. Something wasn't right. The guard's face darkened as he opened the envelope, glancing quickly at its contents before snapping it shut. His expression shifted to something harder, colder. He looked directly at Maya for a long, unsettling moment, and then whispered something to his companion. The energy in the restaurant thickened, almost suffocating. Maya wanted to move, to protest, to insist she had nothing to do with this, but her voice refused to come. Instead, she stood frozen, the weight of suspicion closing in on her. She could feel the judgment of strangers, the watchful stares of the guards, and the growing curiosity of the diners. Every second that passed only made it worse. The manager, who had tried to protect her earlier, now looked conflicted. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Don't say anything," he murmured, his face pale. "Not now." His warning sent a shiver down her spine. What was inside that envelope? Why did the guards suddenly look at her as though she was more than just a waitress making a mistake? Meanwhile, Mr. Lee stirred again, his breathing ragged but his eyes fluttering open. He tried to lift his head, but his strength betrayed him. When his gaze finally found Maya, it lingered, sharp and unblinking, as if she alone carried the answer to something no one else could see. His lips moved once more, but the words were too faint to understand. Still, the intent in his stare was unmistakable. It wasn't random. It was directed. The diners exchanged anxious whispers, sensing that something bigger was happening, something far beyond a simple collapse. The guards tightened their stance, the two mysterious men shifted uneasily, and Maya's world tilted further into chaos. The billionaire's empire, his secrets, the whispers of betrayal, it was all converging here on this single night in this single room. And just when the air seemed heavy enough to break, one of the guards stepped forward toward Maya, his shadow stretching across the floor. The diners gasped, the journalist's pen froze mid-sentence, and Maya's heart pounded in her chest. Whatever happened next would not just decide her fate, but reveal the true depth of the storm she had been dragged into. The room braced for what was coming, but no one was ready for how far the truth would reach. The restaurant slowly began to breathe again after the chaos. The guards who once stood tall and intimidating were escorted away by the police, their betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. The diners, still shaken, whispered to one another about what they had just witnessed. Many knew this night would dominate headlines by morning: the billionaire CEO, the dramatic collapse, the shocking conspiracy. But for Maya, none of it felt like a story. It felt like her life had been turned upside down in ways she couldn't yet understand. She sank into a chair near the corner, her hands still trembling. The manager placed a glass of water in front of her, his voice softer than it had ever been. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly, as though reminding her as much as reassuring her. "You were just in the middle of something bigger than all of us." Maya nodded, but her thoughts kept circling back to Mr. Lee's last words. "You remind me of her." The phrase played over and over in her mind, heavy with meaning she couldn't unravel. Who was this mysterious woman he had spoken of? And why did he see her reflection in a waitress he had met only once? The journalist finally approached Maya, her notebook pressed against her chest. "You know," she said gently, "people will talk about tonight for years. But they'll remember you too. You stood there when no one else dared. You didn't run." Maya looked down, not sure if that was courage or simply being frozen in fear. But either way, she realized the truth. Her quiet presence had mattered. News of the betrayal spread quickly in the days that followed. Articles painted Mr. Lee as a powerful yet vulnerable figure who had been betrayed by those closest to him. The documents found in the envelope exposed a scheme that could have cost him his empire. Public sympathy shifted toward him, and surprisingly, toward the waitress who had become an accidental witness. Maya's name wasn't splashed across every headline, but in quiet corners of the internet, people spoke of her, how dignity and grace often come from the most unexpected places. As for Mr. Lee, he recovered in the hospital, though his empire would never look the same again. The men who tried to betray him were arrested, and investigations continued. Yet, in private, he asked his staff about the waitress from that night. Something about her had shaken him more deeply than the betrayal itself. The connection remained a mystery, but it was enough to leave Maya with a strange sense of significance she had never felt before. In the weeks that followed, Maya returned to her job, though the restaurant now carried a different weight. Customers looked at her with recognition, some with quiet admiration. She no longer felt invisible. The night had scarred her in ways, but it had also lifted her from the shadows. For the first time, she believed that even an ordinary life could intersect with something extraordinary, and that dignity has power far greater than money or status. The story of the billionaire and the waitress ended not with wealth or ruin, but with a reminder to everyone who witnessed it. Power can crumble in an instant, betrayal can rise from the closest hands, but respect, the kind that comes from seeing another human being's worth, will always outlast pride. And as Maya carried another tray across the dining room weeks later, she realized the truth she would hold on to forever. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room can change the story for everyone.